Hi, I'm Paige, the mother of an amazing young man named Jasper. My husband Zach and I had the chance to raise an extremely loving child who unfortunately had Down syndrome. When we first discovered that our child may be born with Down syndrome, a lot of people asked us to get rid of him. Those people included my mother-in-law, Helen. However, we never paid any heed to their opinions and decided to welcome our child into this world. That was a decision I never regretted, and neither did my husband. Jasper was indeed born with Down syndrome and is nonverbal, but he is an amazing child and even worked hard at school. I'm happy to tell you that Jasper has actually graduated from school and is now living a good life. The journey wasn't easy, but we are here now. We had the unconditional support of our parents, John and Abigail, who live nearby. This story is about them, but they are not the ones who caused the trouble. It was Helen, my mother-in-law, who was the root of the problem. Let's start from the beginning, shall we? I already told you that Helen wasn't very thrilled about having a grandchild with Down syndrome. Her views are backwards, so we weren't surprised when she asked us to not have Jasper. But since we didn't take her instructions and had our kid anyway, she stopped those comments. At that time, she was living far away and we actually didn't have much contact. She used to video call with Jasper a lot since he loved talking to her. However, she was a busy woman and paid little attention to us outside of this. Her comments hadn't actually started back then, so we thought that maybe Helen had warmed up to Jasper. We had no reason to suspect otherwise. Our opinion of Helen completely changed when she came to our city around 5 years ago. She had suddenly lost her job and blew through her savings. In the end, she got evicted from her apartment and couldn't find housing within her budget. My parents offered to host her in their rental property at minimal rent, so she agreed to move near us. We were happy to have Helen here, and so was Jasper, who loved his grandma a lot. Nothing had prepared us for what a disaster this move would be. The very first day she came to visit us, she turned her nose up at our son and said, "Why haven't you taught Jasper to talk yet?" We tried our best with therapy and all, but unfortunately Jasper is going to be nonverbal for the rest of his life. Oh God, that's such a big problem. I bet the two of you are tired of trying to understand why he says that. I have been here for an hour and I'm already exhausted. We don't have a problem communicating with Jasper, Helen. We use sign language. You can learn it too to make things easier. Why on earth will I do that? I have nothing to say to a defective child anyway. That was the start of her ridiculous comments. When it happened the first time, you can only imagine how blown away we were. Zach was shocked, and I was actually more angry than anything. I said, "Our son is not defective, Helen. You cannot use words like that to describe him." "Why are you getting so annoyed? I just stated facts. You two should have listened to me and gotten rid of him." "Stop it, Mom. What's wrong with you? Jasper loves and respects you. If he finds out what you think of him, he will be devastated." You see that, Zach? Raising a child like that is so exhausting. It's like they never grow old. You two should stop investing so much money and time in Jasper and work to have a new child. Try having a normal one this time. We are not having a child just because you want a normal grandchild. Jasper is enough for us, and you have to accept that. We are happy, Mom. We wouldn't trade Jasper for anything. You better start believing that, because I will not have you insult my son. That was the start of our war with Helen. We should have cut contact with her then and there, but there was one big problem with that. Jasper loved Helen, and we didn't have the heart to tell him that his grandma was a monster. So we tolerated Helen and shut her down whenever we could. It worked well for the 5 years she was with us, but after that, Helen became insatiable. I still remember what made us start our little revenge against Helen. It was a few days before our son's graduation. Everyone was excited to see Jasper graduate, and my parents wanted us to throw a celebratory dinner later. So we organized a little get-together at our home with friends and family. Helen was also invited. We later learned from our parents that Helen had been saying some nasty things about Jasper to everyone. Zach and I were shocked and super angry. It was then that we decided that we needed to do something. Together with my parents, we came up with a plan. On the day of the party, everything was going great. All our guests were there and Jasper was having a great time. I noticed that Helen was also acting very happy and was actually paying a lot of attention to Jasper. I was desperately praying to God that she had finally decided to change herself. Jasper soon cut his cake and we all cheered for him. When everyone was congratulating Jasper, I noticed that Helen was the only one who didn't say anything. So I said, "Hey, Helen, don't you have anything to say for your grandson? He finally graduated high school with pretty good grades. It would mean a lot to him if you said something nice." "Oh, of course I have things to say, Paige. After all, my only grandson just graduated high school. However, I'm pretty surprised they allowed him to finish school." "Why, Helen? Why wouldn't they allow Jasper to finish school?" "You know why, Paige. There's no point in asking me." "No, I don't know what you're talking about." "Isn't it a waste of resources to teach a disabled kid like Jasper? I mean, his kind will always live an animalistic life since they are not normal like us." I have no idea why Helen thought it would be a good idea to say that in front of all those people. What was more bizarre was that she was thinking these things about her own grandson. I was furious to know that Helen actually compared my son with animals. Jasper has Down syndrome, but that doesn't make him an animal. It was just one of the most vile things I heard anyone say about him. I was pretty pissed off and almost shouted at Helen, saying, "What in the world are you trying to say, Helen? You are really saying that my child is an animal? Jasper is sitting right here." "I know he's sitting right here, Paige. That's why I'm saying these things. You and my son shelter him too much. He needs to know what he is really like." "What is this nonsense, Mom? How dare you insult my son at his own graduation party? Jasper made such a big accomplishment, and you are here just to say nasty things to him." "Oh, please, Zach. Graduating high school doesn't require rocket science. Anyone can do that. Jasper needs to know what the real world thinks of him." Helen was so fast in spending her mind that I didn't even have a chance to get a word in. She kept talking trash, and I could see that her words were upsetting my son. Since he couldn't talk back like us, he remained quiet until Helen continued her onslaught. To our great horror, she actually directly addressed Jasper and said, "Listen to me, Jasper. I'm not going to feed you lies like your parents. You are not meant for big things. People like you will always end up alone and without any help." "What on earth are you saying, Mom? Jasper has us. He won't be alone." "Don't be ridiculous, Zach. Jasper's already 18. You've taken his burden for 18 years already. You don't have to suffer anymore." "Excuse me? My child is not a burden, Helen." "Of course he is, Paige. Jasper, look, dear, your parents already spent their prime time looking after you. Here, take this and consider it your graduation present. It's a business card for a mental institute. You should leave and go there." The entire room was shocked into silence. We and our guests couldn't even comprehend what Helen had just done. I took a peek at what she gave my son and saw that it was indeed a business card. And, yeah, It was a business card of a popular mental health institution that also offered long-term care. Helen had the audacity to give my son that card and tell him to leave. It made my blood boil, and I immediately screamed at Helen, saying, "What on earth is wrong with you, Helen? How dare you do this to Jasper? Don't you have any shame?" "Why would I be ashamed? I'm doing this for your own good, Paige. It's time Jasper finally leaves the nest and becomes independent. You two have wasted enough time and money behind him." "Why do you think it's a good idea to ask my son to leave and join a mental health institution, Mom?" "Because that's where he belongs. We all know that he will amount to nothing because of his disability. So why bother with him anymore? Once he's out of the picture, you two can finally work on giving me a normal grandchild. I have waited enough, and I think it's time you take things seriously." "Listen to me, Mom. We are happy with Jasper and don't need any more kids. You should shut your mouth and stop hurting my son. If you don't stop, we will kick you out right now." That made Helen shut her nasty mouth. She pursed her lips and sat there with her arms crossed. I was still fuming, and Jasper looked like he was going to cry. Yes, my son is a little sensitive, but this was worse because he thought his grandmother loved him. Jasper has a heart of gold and thinks that everyone is like him, kind and loving. Sadly, the world wasn't like that, and Jasper had the misfortune of having a grandmother who didn't understand him. I was so mad that I really felt like making a scene and yelling at Helen, but I knew I had a better sort of revenge prepared for her, and that's why she wasn't kicked out yet. That was why my husband was calm and not reacting like any other parent should. He too was waiting to serve justice in our own way. After Helen's disastrous gift, it was finally my parents' turn to give Jasper their special gift. My parents were already smiling widely, knowing that their gift would fit Jasper's spirits. Helen, on the other hand, was too busy looking like a reprimanded child, so when my parents pulled out some papers, she didn't pay attention to them. She instead laughed at the envelope my parents had and said, "Now what is that, Abigail? Are you also making contributions to send our grandson to a mental institution? Good choice on the gift, I have to say." "Who said we are interested in sending our grandson to a mental institution? These are your thoughts, Helen." "Yeah, unlike you, we actually understand our grandson's potential, so we have a special gift for him. My dear grandson, why don't you open your gift and see what we got for you?" I already knew what the gift was, and so did my husband. We were waiting for my son to open his gift and see what my parents were giving him. My son opened his gift and read the documents inside. His eyes immediately lit up because he was smart enough to understand what they meant. He signed at my parents to ask if his guess was true. My parents signed back saying that his guess was on point. My son absolutely threw his hands up in the air in excitement. All of us were laughing and hugging each other, taking part in my son's happiness. There was, however, one person who sat there looking all confused. It was our dear Helen. She had no idea what was going on and why everyone was so happy. She was a little irritated because she didn't understand sign language, and we were communicating with that to help our son understand our joy. Helen was also curious about the gift that my parents gave my son. Since it made us so happy, it got Helen super curious. She said, "What are you guys celebrating? What is the gift that needed such a big celebration?" "Wouldn't you love to know, Helen? Too bad you're missing out." "I'm missing out only because you're intentionally using sign language around me. You know I don't understand it." "Then you should have learned it for your grandson's sake, Mom. We will continue to use sign language today because that's what our son understands, and this day is about him, not you." "Whatever, Zach. I'm not interested in your retarded son's stupid party anyway. Just tell me what his grandparents gave him as a graduation present." Helen was getting really desperate to know what the gift was, and meanwhile my parents were smiling ear to ear because they knew their gift would surprise the heavens out of my mother-in-law. So when Helen pressed for more information, they said, "Oh boy, you really do want to know what we gave our grandson, don't you, Helen?" Although I don't understand why you're so interested in knowing what your useless grandson is getting. Stop with the unnecessary words, guys. Just tell me what you gave him. Well, we gave him part ownership of our restaurant, along with Zach. So our grandson now co-owns our business with his father. What? You gave him your business? This is one of the things we gave him, Helen. The other gift we gave him was the deed to the house you were staying at. So technically speaking, our grandson is your landlord now. That's right, guys. My dear parents had actually given their share of the restaurant to my son. They had been planning to retire for a while now and were waiting for my son to graduate school and take over the business with his father. Now that my son was finally 18, they decided to retire and follow the plan they had in mind. That wasn't the only gift they gave my son, though. My parents also ended up giving away their rental property so that my son could have his own space and live independently away from us. Now, this is the same rental space where Helen has been staying on low rent for the past 5 years. So you can only imagine Helen's surprise when she discovered that her disabled grandson was now her landlord. She was in complete disbelief and said to my parents, "You guys gave away your business name to Jasper?" "Yup, that's exactly what we did. We're getting old and this is the perfect time for us to retire." "So you thought Jasper would be the best candidate to have your restaurant?" "He will run it to the ground. He can't run a business. He's retarded." "First of all, Helen, if you call my grandson retarded one more time, I will punch you. Secondly, let me tell you that Jasper is perfectly capable of taking care of the business. Besides, his father will be there to help him out as well. Looks like your grandson won't be going to a mental facility after all, especially when my parents have also given him a house he can live in." This is when Helen started to get really concerned. She was probably hoping that I wouldn't bring up the issue of her house. But unfortunately for her, I had my ducks in a row long before the party happened. Zach and I had discussed everything with our parents already. The graduation party was the last chance for Helen to redeem herself, and she jinxed that chance when they trash-talked my son and handed him a business card to a mental hospital. She crossed all limits, and now it was time for her to pay for what she did. Helen was now extremely nervous and kept wringing her hands. She then acted all casual and said, "What do you mean, Paige? Jasper may have gotten the deed to the house, but I still live there. I think we can remedy that fairly easily, Helen." "Yeah, now that Jasper is the legal owner of the house, he can just kick you out and live there instead. What do you think, guys?" "I think it would be a great idea. It would teach Jasper to live independently so that he won't have to use the mental facilities contact that my mom gave him so lovingly." Helen was now backed into a corner because her own son wasn't taking her side. That wasn't surprising since Zach always chose Jasper over his mother. The only reason we kept Helen around was because Jasper loved her up until she hurt his feelings and called him some cruel names. After that day's incident, we weren't going to have Helen around our son anyway, and we were going to explain to him how it's important for him to have boundaries with people. "Let's not rush things now, Zach. I think that Jasper can live on his own. I mean, You're right, Helen. We can't rush things with Jasper. He really needs time to adjust to his new house, so it would be better if he moves in as soon as possible. That way, he would have plenty of time to get settled before taking over the restaurant." "That seems like a good idea, Paige. I'm sure our son will benefit a lot from trying to live independently." "But I don't want to share my space with your son. He will become a liability to me if you leave him with me. I'm not taking care of some disabled child just because I'm his grandmother." "Who says you'll have to share your space with my grandson?" You guys want him to stay at my house? Of course, I'll have to share my space with him. It seemed like my dear mother-in-law was really concerned about having to live with her own grandson. Of course, why would she want to live with Jasper? She already called him an animal and someone who needed to be in a mental facility. There was no way Helen would be nice to Jasper if he ended up living with her. So we weren't going to allow that anyway. Helen's anxiety was totally misplaced. She thought that we would dump our son on her now that he owns the house, but we had an entirely different plan in our minds. I smirked at Helen and decided to tell her the plan we made. I said, "That's where you're wrong, Helen. We never said you would share the house with my son. We all know how much you hate Jasper, so I'm not going to let you stay with my son anyway. We have a very different plan of what we will do, Helen." "Oh, really? What is that plan?" "The plan is to make you move out of the house so that my grandson can move in." Helen's face told it all. She hadn't expected us to tell her to move out. Years ago, my parents did her a favor by allowing her to live in their rental property for very little rent. The rent she paid wasn't even market value. Actually, it was almost half of what she would be paying somewhere else. But my parents, being the generous souls they are, allowed my mother-in-law to move in just because she was my family. My mother-in-law, however, showed us that she didn't even consider my son her grandson, and then proceeded to cruelly insult him. That was something none of us was willing to accept. My mother-in-law wasn't happy with the plan we had in mind. She knew that it would be impossible for her to find decent accommodation within her budget. At my parents' house, she sometimes even skipped rent when she felt like it. My parents never complained because they genuinely wanted to help her out. Helen was my son's grandma after all, but even my parents draw the line when someone disrespects Jasper. They had been observing Helen's horrible attitude for years and slowly started to change their minds about her. My parents, along with Zach and I, decided that enough was enough. Helen tested our limits and we were going to make her sorry. Helen, however, had trouble accepting this. She screamed at us and said, "What? You're going to kick me out? You can't do that to me. You can't throw me out of my own house." "That is not your house, Helen. It was our house, and as you can see, it now belongs to Jasper. You were only a tenant, so we have the power to evict you." "No, you cannot do that to me. I will not leave my house." "Very well then, Helen. If you don't empty the house within a month, we will start an eviction process to kick you out. We're fine either way." Helen was freaking out when no one was coming to her rescue. We only reminded her of the fact that she had no leg to stand on when it came to the house. She had tenancy rights, but we could throw her out with a simple eviction paper. Helen hadn't expected us to be so bold. She had expected it to cave while she continued to act entitled over a house that didn't belong to her. When she found herself cornered, she turned to her son for help. She said, "You can't be serious about this. I am family. Zach, can't you see that they're trying to kick your mother out? Won't you say anything?" "What exactly do you want me to say, Mom? I don't understand how you claim to be family when you have been so cruel towards your own grandson. Someone who insults my son and plays with his feelings is definitely not my family." "I am your mother, Zach. How can you be so mean to me?" "You had no problem being mean to your grandson. I don't see why you have a problem now." "I didn't say anything wrong. I just said things as they are. Now you're punishing me by taking my house away." Helen was now in tears and crying in front of everyone. She was trying to play the victim so that people would come to her side. However, no one budged from their seat, and everyone was actually looking at her in annoyance. Her plan backfired, and Helen was left crying alone about how unfair we were being. By that point, I have had enough of her ridiculous drama, and I said, "Yes, We are punishing you, Helen. What you did is definitely worthy of punishment. Don't think you can paint yourself as a victim now. You said a lot of offensive things to my son, and we will not tolerate that disrespect. So, you're going to make a poor old woman give up her house? For the last time, Helen, it is not your house. We let you stay there out of generosity, but you have shown us what a vile and disgusting human being you are. Jasper loves you, so he won't stand up for himself, but we are here to do it for him. That's right. We will not let you get away, Helen. You will pay for how you treated our grandson. And you can start by emptying out the house. Helen was still crying and trying to tell everyone how cruel we were to her, as if she wasn't the one who started it. After a while, it became clear that the people present at the graduation party were criticizing her instead of us. Helen tried her best to paint herself as the victim and make us change our minds. When everything failed, she started to realize that she messed up big time. She then backtracked and said, "All right, fine. I can see that I made a mistake. I guess I underestimated my grandson. I'm so sorry for that." Do you really think apologizing for your behavior will help your case, Helen? You wanted an apology, and that's what I'm giving you. What seems to be the problem? Now you're being difficult on purpose. An apology wasn't our intention, Helen. You have been asked to apologize almost 100 times since you started with your comments 5 years back. You showed us already that you have no remorse for your actions. Well, then what do you expect me to do? We expect you to clear out of the house and stay away from us. We have had enough of your nonsense, Mom. We don't want any contact with you anymore. What? You want to cut me off? Yes, that's exactly what I want to do, Mom. I've tolerated you dissing my son for years. I thought that maybe eventually you would realize your mistake and correct it. But now I've realized that you will never improve yourself, so you don't deserve a relationship with me anymore. No, don't say that, Zach. Where will I go if you do this to me? I'm your poor old mother. You cannot do this to me. Use the poor old woman card somewhere else, Helen. It won't work here. We're done with you, and we expect you to move out of our son's house as soon as possible. Helen finally fully understood how badly she had messed up. She was being kicked out of her home so that her grandson, whom she called an animal, could live there. Helen panicked hard and cried like a child. It was actually hilarious to watch a full-grown adult throw a tantrum like a child. She kept begging and apologizing while also saying that we were being unfair to her. She was interrupting our party, so eventually we asked her to leave. She then turned to Jasper, hoping he would let her stay. My son did love his grandma, but even he was upset with her that day. So he kept quiet and ultimately allowed us to kick Helen out. Once the party was over, Zach and I went home with Jasper. It was there that Jasper finally expressed how heartbroken he was over Helen's behavior. We assured him that he could stop contact with Helen and we would support him. Jasper then confirmed with us that he no longer wanted to see Helen, and that's all the confirmation we needed to proceed with our plan to kick out Helen. Over the next few days, Helen begged and cried to us daily and asked for forgiveness. Instead of giving her time, we actually straight up served her eviction papers. We discussed this with Jasper, and he was okay with it. So we went ahead and served Helen, who absolutely freaked out on us. It was rather satisfying to see Helen beg for mercy and cry, but the damage was done already. Maybe someone else would have forgiven her. Zach and I simply couldn't. We told Helen that we were done with her and she should leave for good. Helen tried to put up a fight and stay back as long as possible. However, eventually she was forced to leave the house and our city. There was no way she could afford rent and bills anywhere, so she decided to move back in with one of her brothers. Now, that brother of hers loves Jasper and takes serious offense at the way Helen behaved with him. So even though Helen is living in a good house now, she isn't having the best time. Her brother has been berating her nonstop, and she's unable to do anything about it. Now, to end on a positive note, let me tell you what happened with us. My son actually moved into the house that my parents gave him. He's doing great with the adjustments, and we stay over sometimes to help. Zach is also helping him take care of the restaurant so that he can eventually take over when we won't be around. Overall, my son is extremely happy, and so are we. My parents are also thrilled and enjoying their retirement. They have become Jasper's only grandparents and are enjoying the undivided love that my son is showing them.